The more Kamsi mingled with her new friends, the more she began to feel ashamed of Donatus and her humble background. They would often tease her and ask why a beautiful and educated girl like her would settle for a poor mechanic. Kamsi would laugh it off, but deep down their words stung. In a small village called Umuchi lived a young mechanic named Donatus. From sunrise to sunset, Donatus worked tirelessly in his tiny workshop, fixing broken down cars and motorcycles. Despite his hard work, he barely made enough to survive. His hands were always greasy, his clothes tattered. Donatus had grown up in poverty, raised by his grandmother after his parents died in a tragic accident when he was young. Life had never been kind to him, but he was determined to rise above his circumstances. Every day he would look at the faces of the rich customers who brought their luxury cars to him, and he would dream of a better life. But every night he would return to his one-room apartment with a leaking roof and a bed that creaked louder than the engines he fixed. One evening, as Donatus was closing his shop, a young girl named Kamsi ran into his workshop, scared and out of breath. She was being chased by two angry men who accused her of stealing money. Kamsi, who sold oranges to survive, cried and explained that she was only trying to buy medicine for her sick mother. Donatus, on seeing her fear, stepped in and convinced the men who were his regular customers to let her go. Kamsi thanked Donatus, and when he learned about her sick mother, he decided to help. He followed Kamsi to her home, a small rundown shack where her mother lay sick and coughing badly. Donatus promised to help them get the medicine her mother needed. As he left their home that night, Donatus felt a deep connection to Kamsi and her struggles. He realized that this meeting was more than just an accident. It was the start of a journey that would change their lives in ways they never imagined. Kamsi was from a humble background. She lived with her widowed mother in a small house at the edge of the village. They barely had enough to eat, and Kamsi had to drop out of school to help her mother sell fruit at the market. Despite their hardships, Kamsi remained cheerful, her spirit unbroken by the struggles of life. Donatus and Kamsi quickly became friends. They would spend evenings together, sharing stories, laughing and dreaming of a better future. Donatus admired Kamsi, while Kamsi saw in Donatus a man with a heart of gold, despite his poverty. Few months later, Donatus and Kamsi grew closer, their bond deepened by the struggles they shared. Donatus found comfort in Kamsi's laughter, and Kamsi found hope in Donatus's unwavering kindness. They spent every moment they could together, planning a future filled with dreams and love. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. One rainy afternoon, Kamsi was at the market selling her oranges. The sky was dark and a heavy downpour was about to begin. As she tried to sell the last of her fruit, she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her side. Her vision blurred and everything around her spun. She tried to hold on to her basket, but her strength failed her and she collapsed to the ground. People rushed around her, They started shouting in panic. Kamsi's breaths were shallow. Her skin was cold to the touch. Someone recognized her and called Donatus, who rushed to the scene, his heart pounding with fear. When he reached her, Kamsi was barely conscious. Her face was pale and her eyes were filled with pain. Without wasting a second, Donatus lifted her into his arms and rushed her to the nearest clinic. The doctors ran some tests on her. Donatus's hand shook as he waited for answers, silently praying for good news. But when the doctor finally emerged, the look on his face told Donatus everything he didn't want to hear. Kamsi's kidney are failing, the doctor said gravely. She needs a transplant immediately or she won't survive. The words hit Donatus like a punch to the gut. His mind raced and his world seemed to collapse in an instant. How could this happen? How could someone so full of life be struck down so suddenly? Donatus refused to accept it. He promised Kamsi that they would get through this together, no matter the cost. As Kamsi lay in the hospital bed, her health rapidly declined. Every day, her skin grew paler, her eyes dimmer, and her once cheerful voice faded into weak whispers. Donatus watched helplessly as the girl he loved slipped further away. The doctors gave the bad news. Kamsi's kidney were failing fast, and without a transplant, she wouldn't make it. Finding a matching donor was nearly impossible, and even if they did, the cost of the surgery was far beyond anything Donatus could afford. He felt trapped, like he was losing Kamsi bit by bit every day, unable to save her. But Donatus was not about to give up easily. He had faced hardship all his life, and he wasn't about to back down now. He did everything he could think of. He sold his mechanic shop, the one place that had given him a sense of purpose and pride. It was his only source of income, but Donatus didn't hesitate. He handed over the key to his friend who was the new buyer. His heart was heavy but full of hope that the money would be enough to save Kamsi. But when he counted the money, it wasn't nearly enough. The weight of despair settled in. Donatus knocked on every door, begging and borrowing from anyone who would listen. He pleaded with the very men who had once chased Kamsi. He swallowed his pride in hopes of scrapping together what he needed. But no one was willing to help. They whispered behind his back. They mocked him for sacrificing everything for a girl who was slipping away. Donatus became the talk of the town. Friends shook their heads and strangers whispered, "Look at him, a fool in love." Even his family pleaded with him to stop. They told him to think of himself for once. But Donatus couldn't bear the thought of losing Kamsi. He was willing to do anything, pay any price. And then, just when it seemed all hope was lost, Donatus made a decision that no one saw coming. Late one night, as he sat beside Kamsi's bed and watched her struggle to breathe, Donatus realized there was only one way left to save her. He volunteered to donate one of his own kidneys. The doctors were shocked. They warned him of the dangers and the toll it would take on his own health. His friends and family tried to talk him out of it. They told him that it was too risky. "You will ruin your life for her," they shouted. But Donatus couldn't be swayed. His heart was set. He looked at Kamsi, weak and fragile, and knew he couldn't live with himself if he didn't try. To him, Kamsi wasn't just another person. She was his whole world, the one light in his darkest times. He would rather risk his own life than lose her. On the day of the surgery, Donatus's hand trembled, but his resolve was unbreakable. As he was wheeled into the operating room, he whispered to Kamsi, "I'm doing this because I love you. No matter what happens, I want you to live." Kamsi, weak from the pain, could only manage a tearful nod, not fully understanding the depth of his sacrifice. The surgery was lengthy and exhausting. As Donatus lay unconscious, everyone held their breath, uncertain of what would happen next. The outcome was uncertain, and the risks were high. Friends waited anxiously, praying for a miracle. No one knew if Donatus would wake up the scene or if Kamsi's body would even accept his kidney. But when the doors finally opened and the doctors emerged, there was a tense silence. Donatus had survived, and so had Kamsi. The transplant was successful, but the road ahead was uncertain. Donatus woke up weak, his body aching, but his heart was filled with relief. He had given everything for Kamsi, his shop, his health, and nearly his life, and yet he felt it was worth every bit. As Donatus lay recovering, he watched Kamsi slowly regain her health. But little did he know that his greatest sacrifice would soon be met with the most unexpected betrayal, and the love he fought so hard to save would turn into his deepest heartache. Donatus, who was still weak from the operation, stayed by Kamsi's side, pushing through his own pain to make sure she was comfortable. It seemed like their prayers had been answered. Donatus felt relieved, believing that their nightmare was finally over. But as Kamsi's health improved, something began to change. She started going out more. She met new people and talked less to Donatus. Donatus noticed her growing distant. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of a twist he never saw coming. A twist that would turn his world upside down once more. With her health restored, Kamsi decided to go back to school. Donatus was overjoyed at the prospect. He believed it was a step toward a better future for both of them. He supported her in every way he could. He used the money he had left to pay for her tuition and books. As Kamsi immersed herself in her studies, she began to make new friends. These were not the simple village girls she had grown up with. They were from wealthy families with expensive clothes and fancy cars, and a lifestyle that Kamsi had only ever dreamed of. The more Kamsi mingled with her new friends, the more she began to feel ashamed of Donatus and her humble background. They would often tease her and ask why a beautiful, educated girl like her would settle for a poor mechanic. Kamsi would laugh it off, but deep down, their words stung. Slowly, the gap between Donatus and Kamsi began to widen. Among Kamsi's new circle of friends was a young wealthy businessman named Chuka. He was charming, confident, and everything Donatus was not. Chuka had taken a liking to Kamsi from the moment he met her. He would shower her with expensive gifts, and take her to places she had never been before. Kamsi tried to resist Chuka's advances, but the thought of a luxury life was hard to ignore. Chuka was persistent, and soon Kamsi found herself drawn to him. He was everything she had once dreamed of, a man who could give her the world on a silver platter. Donatus noticed the changes in Kamsi, but he tried to ignore them. He believed that their love was strong enough to overcome any obstacle. One fateful evening, Kamsi invited Donatus to a fancy restaurant in the city. Donatus wore his best but worn-out clothes. He felt out of place among the rich patrons. He looked around nervously, feeling small and insignificant. Kamsi arrived, dressed in a beautiful dress that Donatus had never seen before. She looked different, more sophisticated and distant. They sat in silence for a while, and Donatus could feel that something was wrong. "I think we should take a break," Kamsi finally said, avoiding his gaze. Donatus was stunned. "What do you mean?" Kamsi hesitated, her eyes filled with guilt. "I've met someone else, Donatus. I'm sorry," she said. Donatus felt as though the ground had been pulled from under him. He had sacrificed everything for Kamsi, giving her his heart, his kidney, his very soul. And now she was leaving him for a man with a fancy car and deep pockets. "Kamsi, I gave you everything," Donatus said, his voice breaking. "How can you do this to me?" he said. But Kamsi had already made up her mind. She walked away, leaving Donatus alone in the crowded restaurant, his heart shattered in a million pieces. The news of Kamsi's betrayal spread quickly through the village. Donatus became the subject of ridicule, with people whispering behind his back. They mocked him for his foolishness. He returned to his old life, but things were no longer the same. His workshop was gone, his spirit broken, and his dreams dashed. Donatus fell into a deep depression. He stopped working, stopped dreaming, and stopped believing in love. The pain of Kamsi's betrayal was too much to bear, and every day felt like a battle just to survive. He felt like everything he had worked for, every sacrifice he had made, was for nothing. He could barely eat or sleep. He would just sit in his former workshop that he sold to his friend, staring blankly at the tools that once brought him joy. The love of his life had betrayed him, and he was drowning in heartbreak. The pain grew unbearable day after day. The whispers of doubt and despair filled his mind. Donatus felt worthless, abandoned, and lost. He started to believe that maybe life wasn't worth living anymore. One night, as the rain poured heavily outside, Donatus made up his mind. He couldn't take the heartache any longer. He picked up a bottle of pills from his table and stared at it, tears streaming down his face. Just as he was about to take them, there was a sudden knock on the door. It startled him, and for a moment he hesitated. Slowly he opened the door, and standing there, drenched from the rain, was his grandmother, Mama Ijeoma, the only family he had left. Her eyes widened as she saw the pills in his hand and the deep sorrow etched on his face. "Donatus!" she cried. She rushed to him and pulled him into a tight embrace. "What are you doing, my son? Why do you want to end it all?" she asked. Donatus broke down and started crying uncontrollably in her arms. He poured out his heart and told her about Kamsi's betrayal, his lost shop, and the unbearable pain that never seemed to end. Mami Joma listened patiently. Her eyes were filled with tears. She felt every bit of her grandson's agony. She sat Donatus down and held his hand tightly. "Life is full of storms, my child," she said softly, her voice full of warmth and wisdom. "You have been through so much, but taking your own life is not the answer. You gave Kamsi your all, and she left you, but that doesn't mean you have nothing left to live for. You still have a purpose, even if you can't see it right now." Her words, her voice was gentle, and it sank deep into Donatus's heart. Mami Joma reminded him of all the good he had done. She told him stories of his late parents, of how they had faced hardship and never gave up. "You carry their spirit," she said, "and that spirit is not meant to be broken by the selfishness of others," she told him. Donatus listened, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a small spark of hope. He hugged his grandmother tightly, grateful that she had come when she did. If she hadn't, he might not have been there to see another day. Then the next morning, Mami Joma stayed with Donatus. She prepared his favorite meal and tried to lift his spirits. As they ate, Donatus's phone rang. It was a call from a distant friend, Paul, who had heard about his struggles and knew he was looking for work. Paul told him about a job opening as a security guard at a big house in the city. Donatus, who was desperate to get back on his feet, agreed to go for the interview. He hoped it would be a fresh start, but nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. When Donatus arrived at the address, his heart nearly stopped. The grand gates, the tall walls, the luxurious cars parked outside, it all looked familiar. He took a deep breath and knocked on the gate. He tried to steady his nerves. A servant opened the door and led him into the mansion. As Donatus looked around, he froze. This wasn't just any house, Chuka's house, Kamsi's new boyfriend. And then he heard Kamsi's laughter from the living room, and Donatus could see her through the open door, dressed in fine clothes and surrounded by luxury. She hadn't seen him yet, but Chuka was there, sitting comfortably, acting like a king in his palace. Donatus's heart skipped and his mind raced. He couldn't believe the cruel twist of fate that had brought him to this very place. Panic set in, and Donatus felt his legs shaking. He turned around and ran out of the house before anyone could notice him. He ran as fast as he could, his emotion a mix of shock, anger, and deep sadness. It was as if the universe was mocking him, reminding him of his loss in the cruelest way possible. Donatus didn't stop running until he reached a quiet spot far away from the house. He leaned on a wall, trying to catch his breath. He tried to process what had just happened. He felt humiliated, like the world was playing a twisted game with his life. But as he stood there, he remembered the words of his grandmother. "You still have a purpose." Donatus knew he couldn't give up. Not now, not ever. He had been dealt a harsh hand, but he would find a way to rise above it. He wiped his tears, took a deep breath, and walked away. Kamsi, on the other hand, seemed to be happy in her new life. She and Chuka became the talk of the town, their love story celebrated among the rich and powerful. But deep down, Kamsi knew that she had traded something priceless for a life of comfort. Kamsi enjoyed her new life with Chuka, but she couldn't shake off a feeling of emptiness. Chuka gave her everything money could buy: fancy clothes, a big house, and expensive trips. But he didn't have the one thing Donatus had given her: genuine love. She would often catch herself thinking about the simple moments with Donatus, their laughter, their dreams, and how he had risked his life to save hers. Then one day, Kamsi fell ill again. It started with small pains, but soon grew unbearable. She was rushed to the hospital, only to find out that her remaining kidney was failing. The doctor told her she needed another transplant, but this time, finding a donor would be much harder. Chuka, who had promised her the world, didn't want to deal with her illness. He slowly distanced himself, leaving Kamsi feeling more alone than ever. Kamsi reached out to her new friends, but they all turned her away. She became desperate and scared. She found herself thinking of the one person who had stood by her through it all, the person who had given up his own health just to see her smile. Donuts. One day, Kamsi swallowed her pride and went back to Umuchi. She found Donatus sitting outside the apartment. He looked different, more handsome than she remembered. When Donatus saw her, his expression was cold. The pain of her betrayal still hung heavy on his heart. Donatus, I'm sorry, Kamsi said, tears streaming down her face. I was wrong. I was foolish. I need help, she said. Donatus listened silently, his heart torn between anger and the deep love he felt for her. Kamsi told him about her illness, her regrets, and how empty her life had become despite all the wealth she had chased. Donatus sighed deeply. He had every reason to turn her away, to tell her to leave and never come back. But as he looked at her, frail and broken, he saw not the girl who had betrayed him, but the girl he once loved with all his heart, the girl he had saved once before. I can't give you my other kidney, Donatus said quietly, but I can pray that you find someone who will. Kamsi broke down in tears. She realized that she had lost something far more valuable than money: a good man's love. Donatus walked away, leaving Kamsi to reflect on the choices she had made. For the first time, she understood that love wasn't about wealth or status, but about sacrifices made when no one else was watching. She had traded real happiness for pleasures and had paid a heavy price. Few days later, Kamsi's sickness became worse. She became desperate. She needed another kidney transplant. Then one day, she was introduced to Dr. Chima, a greedy doctor who had just started working at a big hospital. Dr. Chima saw Kamsi's situation as a chance to make easy money. He told her that he could get her a kidney without the head surgeon knowing and without following the hospital's strict rules. He demanded all the money up front, and Kamsi, with no other choice, used her last savings, money she had kept from her time with Chuka, to pay him. Dr. Chima promised Kamsi a perfect operation. He planned to steal a kidney during another surgery and secretly use it for her. On the night of the planned surgery, Dr. Chima sneaked into the operating room when no one was around. He managed to take a healthy kidney meant for another patient and tried to slip away without anyone noticing. However, unknown to him, the hospital staff had been keeping a close watch on him because of missing organs in recent weeks. Just as Dr. Chima was about to leave with the stolen kidney, he was stopped by security. The head surgeon and a group of guards were waiting. They had seen everything on the security cameras. Dr. Chima's plan fell apart in an instant and he was arrested. Kamsi woke up to the shocking news that the doctor she had trusted had tried to cheat her. Instead of getting a new kidney, she was left with nothing. No money, no kidney, and no hope. The sudden twist was shocking, showing how dangerous greed can be. Kamsi's health continued to decline and she eventually found a donor, but she never fully recovered. She spent the rest of her life trying to make amends, volunteering at the hospital and helping those in need, but she would always carry the burden of what she had lost. And as for Donatus, he slowly rebuilt his life and later got married to a beautiful woman who was always there for him. He never forgot Kamsi, but he learned to forgive her. With his wife Fumi's help, he reopened his workshop on a large scale. The moral of the story is true love is about sacrifice, loyalty, and standing by each other, even in the toughest times. Donatus gave everything he had out of genuine love for Kamsi, showing that real love isn't about money or material things, but about the willingness to put someone else's need before your own. Kamsi's betrayal teaches us that chasing after wealth and superficial pleasures can lead to emptiness and regret. She traded a pure and selfless love for a life of comfort and status. But in the end, she realized that true happiness doesn't come from riches. It comes from being with those who genuinely care for you. The story reminds us to value the people who stand by us when we have nothing because their love is priceless. It also shows that even when life knocks us down, we should keep going, find forgiveness, and rebuild ourselves, no matter how broken we feel. Thank you.